it is a unique, strange, almost haunting human experience to be standing right in the middle of a crowded room.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you could be completely surrounded by people, maybe even people you know well, like friends or family or coworkers. And suddenly, out of nowhere, you feel this quiet, terrifying ache of being just completely and utterly alone.
It is a profound paradox, isn't it? I mean, you have the physical proximity of a crowd.
No.
You have the noise, the overlapping conversations, the shared physical space, but psychologically, internally, you are stranded on a deserted island.
Yeah.
You're witnessing the event, but you're not truly a part of it.
Exactly. It's this heavy, sinking feeling in the chest.
Yeah.
And usually when we feel that specific type of isolation, our immediate knee-jerk instinct is to fix it.
Oh, we run from it immediately.
We try to numb it. We
Uh.
pull out our phones and start scrolling through feeds of people we don't even really talk to, or we force a laugh at a joke we didn't really hear.
Right, just to blend in.
Yeah, or we just look for the nearest exit to escape the physical discomfort. And the reason we do that is because society has basically pathologized the state of being alone.
Completely.
We treat it as a fundamental failure, a massive red flag. If you're sitting by yourself on a Friday night, the cultural assumption is that something has gone terribly, tragically wrong with your life.
Which is absolutely fascinating because if you look back through history, that narrative flips entirely.
Really?
Yeah. The greatest minds, the foundational philosophers, visionary leaders, the most transformative artists, they didn't just barely tolerate being alone. They actively and sometimes desperately pursued it.
Wow.
They saw it not as a punishment, but as an absolute necessity for greatness.
And that tension right there is the central engine of our deep dive today. We're looking at a massive, incredibly diverse stack of information. And the title of our deep dive today is actually The Art of Solitude, Why High-Value People Choose to Be Alone.
I love that framing. It really sets the stage.
Thanks. Yeah, on one hand, we are digging into ancient Stoic philosophy. We're reading through the personal, private, late-night diaries of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
Some of the greatest writings ever.
Unbelievable stuff. We're looking at the hard-hitting teachings of a former slave-turned-philosopher named Epictetus and the brilliant letters of Seneca. But then on the other hand, we are pulling from cutting-edge modern psychology and neuroscience.
Which is where it gets really interesting, combining the two.
Exactly. We've got neuroscientific data on what isolation does to the physical brain, academic papers pushing for a radical philosophical reevaluation of solitude, and deep explorations into Carl Jung's theories on what he called deep thinkers.
So our overarching mission today is to synthesize these two very different worlds for you.
Right.
We're going to decode the critical, life-altering difference between the destructive, involuntary state of loneliness and the empowering, deliberate art of chosen solitude.
Because they are not the same thing at all.
Not even close. What this synthesis reveals is that mastering the art of being alone isn't a retreat from life. It isn't a surrender. It's actually the ultimate shortcut to psychological resilience, to true self-mastery, and eventually, counterintuitively, to far deeper and more genuine human connections.
Okay, I want to get into the philosophical beauty of all this. But before we can even touch on the art of solitude, we have to deal with the biological elephant in the room.
The brain stuff.
Right. Why are our brains so terrified of being alone in the first place? Because looking at the neuroscientific data we have, it paints a pretty grim, alarming picture of what happens to the human body when we are isolated.
It does, and there is a very powerful evolutionary reason for that terror. We really have to start by understanding the raw biology of isolation.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So the neurological impacts of forced isolation are severe. You have to remember that for early humans, being separated from the tribe was essentially a delayed death sentence.
Because you're just out there on your own.
Exactly. Out on the savannah, you couldn't hunt large game alone, you couldn't maintain a fire alone, and you certainly couldn't defend yourself against predators alone.
Right, you'd just be eaten.
Pretty much. So over millions of years, our brains evolved to perceive a lack of social contact, not just as a, temporary bummer or a sad feeling. It evolved to see it as an active, urgent, existential threat to our survival.
It's a literal alarm bell going off in the nervous system. The brain is basically screaming, find the group or you're going to die.
Precisely. And we can map exactly how this happens in the brain. When someone is involuntarily confined or even just chronically isolated in a modern apartment, the brain's limbic system kicks into overdrive.
And the limbic system, that's the ancient part, right?
Yeah, it's that primitive network responsible for regulating fear, stress, and survival instincts, specifically the amygdala.
The amygdala.
Right. When you are alone for too long, the amygdala becomes hyperactive. It is constantly scanning the environment for danger.
Even if there isn't any.
Exactly. It triggers the hypothalamus, which then signals your adrenal glands to pump out stress hormones like cortisol.
So your body is physically preparing for an attack that just isn't coming. You're just sitting on your couch watching TV, but biologically, you're bracing for a tiger.
Exactly. You're in a chronic state of fight or flight. And here is where it gets truly concerning. While that limbic system is in overdrive, hogging all the brain's resources and energy, something terrifying happens to the prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is the logical part.
Yes, the advanced part located right behind your forehead. It's the hub for complex reasoning, logical focus, impulse control, and moral judgment. Under the sustained stress of isolation, the prefrontal cortex actually begins to shrink.
Shrink, like physically lose cellular mass.
Yeah.
It's not just a metaphor for getting fuzzy, it's physically degrading.
Yes, the cognitive impairment is measurable on brain scans. The neural pathways weaken.
That is wild.
It is. And one of the primary mechanisms behind this decay, according to psychological research, is the loss of a process called social reality testing.
Social reality testing. Okay, let's unpack that, because this concept completely blew my mind when I read it in the sources.
It's a great concept.
It's essentially using other people as an external hard drive or like a sounding board for your own sanity, right?
So that's a great way to think about it. Every day when you're interacting with people, you are constantly subconsciously recalibrating your own perceptions of reality.
Just by talking to them.
Yeah. You tell a story, you watch your friend's facial expression, you gauge their reaction, and you subconsciously confirm, okay, my perception of reality aligns with the group. I am acting appropriately.
Right, like if I get angry about something at work and I vent to a coworker, if they look confused, my brain realizes, maybe I'm overreacting here.
Exactly. You get that immediate feedback.
I was trying to think of a way to visualize this. It's almost like having a gyroscope in your smartphone.
Okay, I track with that.
Like, the phone only knows which way is up because it's constantly referencing the physical gravity around it. Without that external gravity, the gyroscope is useless. In this scenario, other people are the gravity. Without them, your psychological gyroscope loses its anchor. You start floating.
That is a phenomenal analogy. You absolutely start floating, and usually you float into dark places.
Yeah, the thoughts get weird.
When you're entirely alone for prolonged periods, you lose that external gravity. Your thoughts begin to spiral. Impulses take the reins because, remember, the prefrontal cortex is shrinking and can't regulate them as well.
Oh, right. The logic center is shrinking.
Exactly. So minor anxieties, like someone not replying to an email, can balloon into massive, all-consuming paranoias because there's no external feedback loop to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you are overthinking this.
And when you lay out that biological terror, it completely explains the massive public health campaigns we see today.
Oh, for sure.
We have government agencies and health organizations warning against this epidemic of loneliness. They're treating isolation with the same urgency as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or severe obesity.
Because the biological damage is real.
Right. But here is where we hit a massive contradiction in our sources. We have this academic research calling for Nietzschean reevaluation of solitude.
Yes, this is where it flips.
These existential philosophers are looking at the exact same terrifying biological data, and they're arguing that society pathologizing all alone time is actually a catastrophic mistake.
It is a vital counter-argument. If we zoom out and connect this to the bigger philosophical picture, the existentialists are drawing heavily on Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of reevaluating our core values.
Right. Shaking up what we assume is true.
Exactly. They suggest that because modern society is so hyper-focused on the negative health impacts of chronic loneliness, we've panicked and thrown the baby out with the bathwater.
Like all isolation is bad now.
Yeah. Yes, chronic unwanted loneliness is biologically toxic. But by broadcasting the message that all isolation is inherently dangerous, we're actively robbing people of the single most important developmental tool they have.
Which is the space necessary for self-knowledge.
Precisely.
Because how can you possibly figure out who you actually are, what you actually believe, or what you genuinely want out of life if your brain is constantly being flooded by the opinions, expectations, and loud noise of everyone around you?
You cannot. It is impossible to hear your own internal voice when you are standing next to a cultural megaphone.
Wow, a cultural megaphone, that's so true.
But what's fascinating and somewhat tragic is the cyclical trap people fall into when they try to navigate this. Modern psychology maps out a concept known as learned social helplessness.
A self-fulfilling prophecy of isolation. How does that loop actually start?
Well, it usually starts with a fundamental mismatch between an individual and their environment. Imagine someone who experiences repeated social rejections. Maybe they have different interests, a different communication style, or they constantly feel deeply misunderstood when they do make the effort to connect.
Right, they just don't gel with the people around them.
Exactly. The human brain is, above all else, a pattern recognition machine. After enough of these negative encounters, the brain starts to associate the very act of reaching out with the feeling of emotional pain and rejection.
So it touches the hot stove, gets burned, and eventually decides, I'm never going near the kitchen again.
Exactly. To protect itself from further psychological injury, the brain initiates a strategic retreat.
It shuts down.
The person stops trying to make plans. They stop sharing their true thoughts. They physically isolate themselves to avoid the sting of rejection. But tragically, that physical isolation triggers the ancient limbic system's threat response we just talked about.
The alarm bells start ringing again.
The amygdala fires up, dumping cortisol into their system, which makes them feel physically and emotionally worse. This heightened stress makes them even more socially anxious and awkward.
Oh, man. So then if they try again.
Exactly. It guarantees that if they do try to socialize, it goes poorly, which only deepens their belief that isolation is the only safe option.
It is an absolutely brutal, inescapable loop. And the research points out this fascinating, eerie detail about how this level of prolonged loneliness literally alters the way your brain processes the passage of time.
Time distortion is a huge factor.
Right. Without shared moments, without someone sitting next to you to say, wow, this afternoon is flying by, or can you believe it's already Friday? Time just stretches out like taffy.
It just drags.
Minutes feel incredibly heavy. The days blur together into one long, gray continuum because there are no relational markers, no shared events to break up the flow of existence.
You're no longer living in the shared consensus flow of reality. You're trapped entirely inside the echo chamber of your own thoughts.
Okay, but I have to push back here because everything you just described sounds like pure torture.
It is.
If our brains literally register isolation as physical pain, if our prefrontal cortex is shrinking, and if time itself becomes this heavy, unbearable burden, aren't the philosophers who advocate for solitude fighting a completely losing battle against basic human biology?
That's the logical conclusion, yeah.
I mean, you can't just philosophize your way out of a shrinking brain and a cortisol overdose. Biology always wins.
Right.
That is the crucial question. It seems like a contradiction until you introduce one critical transformative distinction. The variable that changes the entire biological equation is agency.
Agency. The power of choice.
Yes. The neurological decay, the limbic panic, the cognitive shrinking we see in those studies, that applies almost exclusively to forced isolation.
Ah, okay.
Solitary confinement in a prison, being completely ostracized by your community, being trapped in a state where you desperately want connection, but you are repeatedly denied it.
That's when the brain melts down. Exactly. That lack of control destroys the mind. But chosen solitude, stepping away from the crowd deliberately, intentionally, to reflect, to create, or to rest, that heals the mind.
So mechanically, what is happening differently in the brain when I choose it?
When you choose to be alone, your brain does not trigger the limbic panic alarm.
Why not?
Because the prefrontal cortex remains engaged and tells the amygdala, we are safe, we are choosing this, we hold the key to the door, and we can leave and find the tribe whenever we want.
Wow.
It's the exact difference between being locked in a dark basement against your will and choosing to go into a dark sensory deprivation tank for a spa treatment.
Oh, that is such a good comparison.
The physical environment is identical, right? A human being alone in the dark. But the psychological state of agency dictates whether the brain releases stress hormones that tear the body down or restorative neurochemicals that build the body up.
Wow. That distinction changes everything because it means the empty room isn't the enemy. The lack of control is the enemy.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a very specific group of people. Because while some people learn to tolerate an empty room, there are individuals who seem naturally drawn to this chosen solitude.
They seek it out.
Right. They don't run from the quiet. They actively crave it. And society often deeply, profoundly misunderstands them.
Which leads us perfectly into the psychological profile of these individuals. If we look at the work of Carl Jung and the modern psychological analysis of what are commonly called deep thinkers, we start to see why certain people naturally struggle with the surface level interactions that society demands of them.
Jung is such a fascinating figure. He spent his entire life mapping the darkest, deepest corners of the human psyche.
He really did.
And he made this rather profound, if somewhat melancholy, observation about intelligence and awareness. He noted that the more intelligent, and specifically the more self-aware a person is, the more they inevitably suffer from the general unconsciousness of society.
The general unconsciousness. That is a brilliant phrase.
It really is.
It refers to the reality that the vast majority of people are simply going through the motions. They're following the cultural script they were handed at birth. Get this job, buy this car, say these phrases, watch this show, without ever truly examining their lives or questioning the underlying structures of their reality.
And deep thinkers, according to this framework, just aren't built that way. They possess a fundamentally different psychological architecture.
Yes.
And modern neuroscience actually backs Jung up here. We can map this psychological profile onto what researchers call highly sensitive persons, or HSPs.
Exactly, the HSP trait.
The data suggests roughly 20% of the population has a neurologically different way of processing sensory and emotional information. They don't just observe their environment like a security camera, they absorb it.
The term often used in the psychological literature is emotional sponges. They experience a high degree of psychological contagion.
Okay, explain how psychological contagion works in a practical, everyday setting. Like, what does that actually look like?
Imagine walking into a conference room at an office. Two people in that room just had a vicious whispered argument right before you opened the door.
Oh, awkward.
Very. But when you walk in, they instantly stop. They put on fake smiles and pretend everything is fine.
Right, nothing to see here.
Most people, the 80%, will walk in, look at the smiles, take them at face value, and sit down without a second thought. The deep thinker, the emotional sponge, walks in and immediately feels the atmospheric pressure change.
They just know.
They absorb the unspoken anxiety hanging in the air. They detect the hidden anger in the micro-expressions. They feel the tension in the posture. Without even trying, their nervous system downloads the emotional state of the room.
It sounds utterly exhausting. It's like having your Wi-Fi receiver turned up to maximum sensitivity, constantly downloading everyone else's corrupted files without your permission.
It is intensely draining. And this biological sensitivity is compounded by the fact that we currently live in a culture suffering from widespread depth phobia.
Depth phobia. The fear of anything that goes below the surface. We see it everywhere.
Absolutely
We
everywhere.
actively medicate any form of emotional discomfort. We reward outward performance over internal authenticity. We want the easy, digestible answer in a 15-second video, the quick medical fix, the pleasant, frictionless small talk about the weather.
So put yourself in the shoes of the deep thinker sitting at a dinner party surrounded by this depth phobia. What does that experience actually feel like for them?
It means they are vibrating at a frequency of truth in a room that is fiercely committed to maintaining a comfortable, polite illusion.
Yes, the illusion.
We're looking at the Eastern philosophical concept of Maya here, which translates roughly to the veil of illusion that obscures ultimate reality.
Maya, exactly.
Most of society is quite happy living within the veil of Maya. They like the shadows. But the deep thinker sees behind the veil. They see the raw mechanics of human behavior.
They can't unsee it.
They sit at the dinner party, and they see the deep, unhealed insecurities driving the loud guy's boastful stories. They see the terrifying fear of irrelevance driving the neighborhood gossip. Because they see the truth beneath the words, small talk doesn't just feel boring to them. It feels agonizingly fake. It feels like participating in a collective lie.
It is a profound alienation. There's an incredibly apt analogy from the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer that illustrates this perfectly. It's called the hedgehog's dilemma.
I love this one. It paints such a clear picture.
Go ahead, explain it.
So Schopenhauer says, human beings are like a bunch of hedgehogs trying to survive a freezing winter night. To keep from freezing to death, they huddle close together for body heat.
Makes sense.
But because they are hedgehogs, as soon as they get too close, they end up pricking each other with their sharp spines. It hurts, so they pull apart.
Right.
But then they get freezing cold again, so they spend their lives doing this awkward, shuffling dance, trying to find this exact middle distance where they are slightly cold, but not actively bleeding.
And how does this apply to the deep thinker?
The idea is that deep thinkers have particularly sharp, long spines. They have this intense, burning craving for deep, authentic, warm connection. But because their minds work so intensely, because they ask the heavy questions and see through the illusions, they inadvertently prick or overwhelm the people around them who just wanted a little surface-level, polite warmth.
They just wanted to talk about the game.
Exactly. They bring up existential dread at a barbecue. Everyone else just wanted to talk about sports.
It is the tragedy of mismatched depths, and it aligns perfectly with one of the oldest philosophical metaphors we have, Plato's allegory of the cave.
A classic.
Think of the deep thinker as the prisoner who has been forcefully freed from the chains. They've walked out of the dark cave, they've seen the actual sun, the trees, the true reality, and they realize that the shadows dancing on the cave wall, which everyone else thinks is reality, are just cheap illusions.
We see the truth.
But the tragedy of the allegory is the return. When the freed prisoner goes back down into the cave to share this beautiful, complex truth with their friends, the other prisoners reject them violently.
They don't want to hear it.
They prefer the comfortable shadows. They find the truth teller annoying, disruptive, and weird. They don't want the light. The light hurts their eyes.
And so, faced with that constant rejection, faced with being told they are too intense or too sensitive or killing the vibe, the deep thinker does something deeply tragic to survive. They construct what psychologists call the mask of normalcy.
Yes. They learn the art of camouflaging.
It's pure survival.
It is a survival mechanism. They deliberately modulate their tone of voice to sound lighter. They practice laughing at jokes they don't find remotely funny. They pretend to care deeply about trivial office politics or celebrity gossip, all to avoid making the people around them uncomfortable.
It's a full-time performance.
They dedicate immense cognitive resources to performing normalcy just to reduce social friction.
I have an analogy for this, and tell me if this tracks.
Yeah.
It's like having a smartphone where you are running 50 heavy, battery-draining background applications while you're just trying to make a simple phone call.
Oh, that's perfect.
Outwardly, the person is just standing by the water cooler nodding at a story about someone's golf game. But inwardly, their battery is completely draining because they are manually suppressing 1,000 natural reactions, analyzing every facial micro-expression, and actively holding back their true thoughts.
That tracks perfectly, and it leads to exactly what you'd expect. Extreme battery depletion, or what is clinically referred to as masking fatigue. And this fatigue creates a severe, destructive emotional asymmetry in their relationships.
What do you mean by emotional asymmetry?
Because the deep thinker is so perceptive, because they naturally absorb the emotions of a room, people instinctively gravitate toward them when they are in pain.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Coworkers, friends, even strangers will dump their trauma on them. The deep thinker naturally becomes everyone else's unpaid, informal therapist. They are incredibly good at holding space for everyone else's pain. But because the deep thinker is constantly wearing the mask of normalcy, because they are pretending everything is fine to avoid being too much, no one ever holds space for their pain.
Oh, wow.
They offer deep support to dozens of people, but they feel they have no one they can safely unmask in front of.
That is heartbreaking. So they are completely drained, surrounded by people who rely on them, yet they are utterly, fundamentally alone.
Precisely. And if they continue on that path, total psychological collapse or severe burnout is inevitable. To survive this, they must initiate a strategic retreat.
They have to get out.
They cannot live in the crowd forever. They have to build an impenetrable inner fortress, a sanctuary of solitude where they can finally take the heavy mask off, let the background apps close, and just breathe.
Okay, so if the modern psychological diagnosis is that deep thinkers are constantly draining their batteries by masking, and society's depth phobia leaves them feeling completely isolated, did anyone in history actually figure out a cure for this?
As a matter of fact, yes.
Because I don't want to just diagnose the problem. I want the blueprint for this fortress. And historically, we actually have one. It comes from the Roman Empire. Let's pivot to the ancient Stoic defense and the dichotomy of control.
It is the perfect historical answer to the modern problem. If the modern issue is masking fatigue, emotional drain, and the feeling of being overwhelmed by the unconsciousness of society, the ancient Stoics thinkers like Epictetus, Seneca, and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius offer the ultimate antidote.
They really do.
They engineered a practical philosophy designed specifically from the ground up to make a human being unconquerable.
Unconquerable. I love the weight of that word. It implies that you are absolutely going to be under attack. Life is going to hit you. People are going to drain you. Tragedies will happen. But despite being under attack, you cannot be defeated from the inside.
Exactly. The Stoics were not optimists who thought bad things wouldn't happen. They were realists preparing for war.
Right.
And the foundational weapon, the core operating system of the entire Stoic arsenal, is a concept called the dichotomy of control.
Okay, let's break this down.
It is the absolute, ruthless, uncompromising separation of the entire universe into two distinct categories. Things we cannot control and things we have absolute sovereign control over.
Okay, let's look at the mechanics of this because it sounds simple, but it is incredibly difficult to practice. What falls into the category of things we cannot control?
Almost everything external to your own mind. You cannot control your reputation no matter how hard you try.
Because that's just what other people think of you.
Exactly. Your reputation literally exists inside the electrical impulses of other people's brains, which you cannot access. You cannot control the actions of your coworkers, the fluctuations of the economy, the weather.
Sure.
And ultimately, and this is the hardest pill to swallow, you cannot even fully control your own physical health or your wealth. Fortune, genetics, or a random accident can take your money or your mobility away in a single instant.
So if we strip all of that away, wealth, health, reputation, other people, what is actually left? What do we possess absolute control over?
The only things you truly own are your moral choices, your will, and your opinions about the external events that happen to you.
Just your own mind.
Yes. The Stoics conceptualized human existence as a series of defensive battle lines. The enemy, which they defined as unpredictable fortune or the cruelty of other people, might easily breach your outer defenses. They might steal your money. They might imprison your physical body.
Right.
Furthermore, your immediate biological passions, the sudden spike of fear when you hear a loud noise, the pang of distress when you are insulted, the rush of lust, might strike you before your rational mind can even intervene.
Right. That aligns perfectly with what we discussed earlier about the limbic system. You can't stop the initial physiological jolt of panic when the amygdala fires. The outer wall is breached.
Exactly. The biological reaction is external to your will. But the final line of defense, the innermost wall of the Citadel, is your ability to choose what you do in the millisecond after that initial jolt.
The moment of choice.
Yes. How do you frame the event? What narrative do you attach to the physical sensation? If you surrender that choice, if you let the external event or the internal panic dictate your moral state and your actions, you have defeated yourself.
You gave up.
No tyrant conquered you. You willingly handed them the keys to your inner citadel.
To make this incredibly visceral, there is a famous exchange from the life of Epictetus that captures this perfectly. You have to remember the context here. Epictetus was not an emperor. He was a former slave who was physically crippled, possessing zero political power.
Yes, very different from Marcus Aurelius.
Right. And he is having a conversation with a tyrant, a man who holds the power of life and death over him. The tyrant tries to intimidate him. Epictetus says, if you say, I will put you in chains, I reply, you threaten my hands and my feet. If you say, I will behead you, you threaten my neck.
That's so powerful.
But the underlying point Epictetus is making is, you can chain my leg, but you can never, ever threaten my choice.
It is a stunning display of psychological sovereignty, because the choice belongs entirely to the mind. The tyrant has absolute power to destroy the physical body, to throw him in a dark cell, to inflict pain.
Yeah.
But the tyrant is utterly powerless to force Epictetus's mind to assent to something he believes is false. The tyrant cannot force the philosopher to become unjust or to surrender his inner peace.
I was trying to think of a way to visualize this kind of overwhelming external pressure versus internal choice. And the best modern myth for this is The Lord of the Rings.
Okay, I love this analogy.
Think about Frodo Baggins carrying the One Ring to Mordor. The ring is the ultimate manifestation of uncontrollable external pressure. It generates this overwhelming, almost biological radiation of passion, fear, and attachment.
Right, it's constantly attacking his mind.
Throughout the journey, Frodo's outer defenses are completely breached. He is physically exhausted, he is starving, he is terrified, he is being hunted. The limbic system is redlining.
The outer walls have fallen.
But his inner strength, his unbroken choice to endure the burden, take one more step toward the fire, despite the emotional and physical overwhelm, that is the ultimate example of defending the final Stoic battle line. The ring can make him suffer, but it cannot make him quit.
It's a beautiful translation of an ancient concept into a modern narrative. And if we want to translate it into actionable modern advice, the sources bring in a practical application from the investor and author Tim Ferriss. He calls it fear setting, which is a direct descendant of Stoic philosophy.
Yes, fear setting as opposed to goal setting. How does the mechanism of that actually work?
Ferris argues that what keeps us paralyzed in life, what keeps us wearing the mask of normalcy and submitting to miserable jobs or toxic relationships, is vague, undefined, nebulous fear. It's a dark cloud in our minds.
It's just this amorphous dread.
Exactly. So the exercise requires you to write down your fears in excruciating granular detail. If I quit my job, what is the absolute worst case scenario? Will I be homeless? Will I starve?
Getting it out of the cloud and onto the paper?
Yes. By forcing yourself to define the nightmare on paper, you are effectively applying the dichotomy of control. You separate the external things that might actually happen. Having to sell your car, moving to a smaller apartment, which are survivable and temporary, from the catastrophic internal panic your mind is projecting.
It grounds you.
You conquer the fear by illuminating it, which frees up your prefrontal cortex, restoring your ability to choose your actions rationally.
Okay, I love the theory of the inner citadel. It sounds incredibly empowering on paper. But let's bring this down to earth for a second. Let's play devil's advocate.
Please do.
If you, the listener, are going through a devastating, messy breakup, or you have just been abruptly fired from a career you built for a decade,
Yeah.
or you're sitting in a quiet apartment feeling that crushing physical ache of isolation we talked about in the beginning,
Real trauma.
it is really, really hard to just snap your fingers, quote Epictetus, and say, I am a Stoic, I choose not to be harmed.
Yeah.
It feels almost delusional. How did these ancient philosophers actually practice this in the messiness of daily traumatic life?
That is the most important question we can ask, because philosophy without application is just intellectual entertainment.
Exactly.
The answer lies in looking closely at the life of Marcus Aurelius. He was the emperor of the Roman Empire. He had infinite wealth, absolute power, but he also carried infinite crushing stress.
The weight of the world.
He faced devastating plagues that wiped out millions, constant wars on the borders, and deeply personal betrayals from his closest generals. And the crucial context here is that he didn't write his famous book, Meditations, for publication.
Right.
He wasn't sitting in a villa trying to write a self-help bestseller to show everyone how enlightened he was.
Right. These were his private raw diaries. They were never meant to be read by anyone else.
Exactly. They were a collection of what the ancient Greeks called hupomnemata. These were daily, practical, highly repetitive mental exercises. It was a rigorous therapeutic practice.
He was essentially doing cognitive behavioral therapy on himself.
Yes. He was writing these notes to himself by candlelight in freezing military tents on the Germanic frontier, desperately trying to pull his own mind back from the brink of despair. He was furiously journaling his way out of anxiety attacks.
Wow.
He had to remind himself of his own philosophy daily, because if he didn't, he would succumb to the overwhelming pressure of his reality.
Which is honestly incredibly comforting. It means the Emperor of Rome struggled with the exact same anxiety and feelings of overwhelm that we do.
He was human.
He wasn't a robot. He was a human fighting a daily battle for his own mind. So let's open up that diary. Let's look at the specific mechanical psychological exercises Marcus Aurelius used inside his inner citadel to stop caring about things that don't actually matter.
The most prominent and aggressive exercise highlighted in the philosophical research is the practice of erasing impressions.
Erasing impressions, meaning actively changing how things appear to us in our minds. How does that work mechanically?
The Stoics use the metaphor of a wax tablet. They believe our minds are like soft wax. External events stamp impressions onto the wax.
Okay.
For example, you see two coworkers whispering and looking at you. The raw event is just two people whispering. But the impression stamped onto your mind is, they are plotting against me, I am going to be fired, this is terrible.
The story we tell ourselves.
Exactly. Marcus Aurelius believed that because these initial impressions are almost always false, heavily value-laden, and the root cause of our anxiety, we must actively, consciously overwrite them. We have to melt the wax and stamp it with objective, boring reality.
We have to strip the emotional weight and the narrative off the event.
Precisely. He practiced stripping things naked to remove their power to seduce or terrify him. And this applied heavily to how we experience the illusion of time.
How so?
The Stoics recognized a profound psychological truth. Human beings suffer immensely, but we rarely suffer in the present. We suffer mostly in the future by imagining vivid catastrophes that haven't happened yet. Or we suffer in the past by obsessively ruminating over mistakes or wishing we could change a history that is already set in stone.
As Seneca brilliantly and succinctly put it, we suffer more in imagination than in reality.
Marcus realized that from a logical standpoint, the past is entirely untouchable and the future is entirely unknowable. Therefore, the only domain we actually inhabit, And the only domain where our choices have any actual power is the razor-thin, fleeting present moment.
That's all we have.
If you can use your mind to erase the terrifying impressions of the imaginary future and erase the heavy regrets of the unchangeable past, the present moment, just sitting in a chair breathing, is almost always bearable.
And his specific examples of how to erase impressions are so vivid and honestly almost brutally reductionist. I want to look at a few because they are fascinating.
They're great.
He would sit at an imperial banquet, surrounded by the wealthiest, most powerful people in the known world, looking at this lavish, incredibly expensive feast. And to stop himself from being seduced by luxury and gluttony, he would look at a highly sought-after roasted delicacy and write in his diary, "This is just the corpse of a fish."
Just a corpse.
Or he'd look at a pheasant and write, "This is the corpse of a dead bird." He would look at the majestic, purple-edged robes of royalty, which were the ultimate unquestionable status symbol in Rome. And he would remind himself, this is nothing but sheep's wool dyed by the blood of a shellfish.
It is a masterful alchemical deconstruction of societal value. By reducing the highly coveted object to its literal, physical, biological components, he strips away the invisible, powerful societal narrative that makes us crave it, envy it, or fear losing it.
But hold on, let me challenge this heavily. Because while I see the utility in calming down, that sounds incredibly bleak.
It can sound that way, yes.
If I walk through my life reducing my wedding ring to just a shiny piece of carbon dug out of the dirt,
Yeah.
or reducing a beautiful anniversary dinner to chewing on dead animals and drinking fermented grape juice, aren't I just giving myself clinical depression?
That's a fair point.
If everything is just atoms and corpses, where is the joy? Is this just a recipe for profound cynicism?
That is the most common critique of Stoicism, but it misunderstands the tool. Erasing impressions is not meant to be a permanent lens through which you view love, art, or joy.
It's not a permanent filter.
No, it is a highly specific tactical weapon used to neutralize toxic desire and overwhelming anxiety. You don't use it on your family. You use it on your overwhelming craving for a luxury car that is causing you to work 80 hours a week and neglect your family.
Well, yeah.
You use it to realize the car is just a piece of metal so you can reclaim your life. It is liberating, not depressing. It frees you from the tyranny of external things.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. It's a scalpel used to cut out tumors of anxiety, not a sledgehammer to destroy your entire house. And this exact same unlayering process applies to how we handle adversity. There is this brilliant ancient analogy mentioned in the philosophy called the squealing pig.
It is an uncomfortable but perfect illustration of human resistance.
The analogy goes like this. Imagine a cart being pulled by a horse, and tied to the back of the cart is a pig. The cart represents the unstoppable movement of fate or the present moment.
Right.
Now, the pig has a choice. It can trot along behind the cart, accepting the journey, and experience relatively little pain. Or it can plant its feet, resist, kick, and squeal as it is violently dragged through the mud and over the rocks. If you fight against the present moment, if you are furiously angry that you are alone on a Friday, or screaming at the universe because your flight was canceled, you are the squealing pig.
The absolute core of that analogy is that the struggle, the squealing, and the kicking change absolutely nothing about the final outcome.
Nothing at all.
The cart is moving regardless. The flight is still canceled. You are still alone in the apartment. The resistance only serves to exhaust you, ruin your peace of mind, and tear up your knees on the rocks.
Right. So the Stoic alternative to squealing is the concept of Amor Fati, which translates to loving your fate. Not just grinning and bearing it, not just enduring it with gritted teeth, but actively welcoming the present moment exactly as it is because it is the only reality that exists.
And Marcus Aurelius used a sort of ultimate mind-bending metaphysical reframe to force his own brain into this state of radical acceptance. He constantly wrote the phrase in his journal, providence or atoms.
I need you to explain the mechanics of providence or atoms because out of context, it sounds like the title of a sci-fi novel.
It was his way of summarizing the two dominant competing theories of the universe in the ancient world. Either the universe is governed by providence, meaning it is a beautifully designed, infinitely intelligent, purposeful machine where every single event happens for a specific reason.
Which is what the Stoics believe.
Right. Or the universe is just atoms, meaning reality is entirely random chaos, just blind particles colliding in the void without meaning or designer, which is what the Epicureans believed.
Okay, so reality is either totally perfectly purposeful or it is totally fundamentally random.
Exactly. And Marcus concluded that he didn't even need to solve the metaphysical debate because in either scenario, grumbling, complaining, or being anxious about your current situation is completely illogical. Well, if reality is providence, complaining means you are protesting against divine mathematical perfection, which is arrogant. If reality is atoms, complaining means you are yelling at random, meaningless chance, which is literally a waste of breath.
You're just yelling at rocks.
Either way, whether by God or by gravity, the event has happened. The only rational, productive response is to accept the present moment and focus entirely on your own internal moral choices.
Okay, I want to take all of this heavy philosophy and apply it directly to the listener right now. Let's say I am sitting in my apartment alone. I use this Stoic toolkit. I strip away all the suffocating societal pressure of needing to be popular or partnered. I erase the false impression that being alone means I am inherently a loser or a failure.
You're doing the work.
I look at the raw, boring facts. It's just me sitting in a room, breathing air. It's not inherently dangerous. The tiger is not in the room. The limbic system finally calms down. The prefrontal cortex comes back online. I've successfully defended the inner citadel.
Fantastic.
But now what? Once the panic is gone and the silence settles in, what do I actually do with that solitude?
That question marks the critical turning point in a human life. It is the moment we shift from stoic defense to active, forward-moving offense. Solitude isn't just a bunker for surviving isolation or merely enduring the ticking clock of an empty room.
It's more than just enduring.
Much more. Once the fear is gone, solitude becomes an active, powerful alchemical process for building a high-value, extraordinary life.
Which brings us to the most actionable part of our journey, Section 5, the alchemy of solitude, and how we actually transform isolation into pure power.
If we synthesize the psychological research on the benefits of chosen solitude, particularly looking at the data on why embracing singlehood or periods of intense isolation can be profoundly beneficial, we see a complete psychological metamorphosis. It is an upgrade of the human operating system.
It really is.
Yeah.
The data lists these massive, highly tangible benefits that you literally cannot access when you are constantly surrounded by the noise of a crowd. The first and most obvious is full, unadulterated freedom over your most precious resource, which is your time.
Time is everything.
When you aren't constantly negotiating your daily schedule, your weekend plans, or your emotional energy around someone else's moods, preferences, or crises, you are suddenly handed this incredible, terrifyingly blank canvas.
And that blank canvas allows for the pursuit of true self-mastery without distraction. In chosen solitude, you can establish rigorous routines. You can focus deeply on your career trajectory, your physical health, your intellectual growth.
You're not compromised.
Exactly. You aren't bleeding out your life force, managing someone else's chaos, or participating in the friction of the hedgehog's dilemma. You are actively protecting your energy from toxic, draining individuals.
And arguably the biggest psychological upgrade of all. You finally escape the exhausting, invisible trap of seeking external validation.
This is a critical point that cannot be overstated. When our internal peace and our self-worth depend entirely on someone else's approval, whether that is a romantic partner, a demanding boss, or the vague concept of society at large, we are no longer living our own lives.
We're just playing a role.
We become performers. We put that mask of normalcy back on. We shape our opinions, our political views, our values to fit whatever we think will keep us safe, liked, and accepted by the tribe. Epictetus, our Stoic guide, gave a brilliant, brutal piece of advice on how to break this cycle.
What did he say?
He said that if you truly want to improve yourself, you must be content to be thought foolish and stupid by the rest of the world.
That is such a hard, jagged pill to swallow. Be content to be thought foolish. It goes against every biological instinct we have to fit in, but at the same time, it is the most freeing sentence I have ever heard.
It really is.
If you genuinely do not care, if people think you are weird for staying home on a Friday to read history books, or single by choice, or uninterested in the status games they are playing, they lose absolutely all power over you. The strings are cut.
Exactly. And the mechanism for cutting those strings is solitude. By sitting in the discomfort of silence, by voluntarily enduring that initial pang of feeling left out or missing out, you are essentially lifting weights for your emotional immune system.
Emotional reps.
You build emotional independence. You learn how to comfort yourself when you are anxious instead of immediately texting someone to soothe you. You learn how to motivate yourself when you are tired instead of relying on external pressure.
You become self-reliant.
You ultimately realize, on a deep visceral level, that you do not fundamentally need another person to survive emotionally. You are completely sufficient.
The modern validation trap is so insidious. It happens by 1,000 tiny cuts. We shape our wardrobe to fit trends. We shape our weekends around our partner's comfort zone. We alter our career goals to impress our parents until we wake up at age 40 and realize we have completely forgotten what our actual authentic life mission even was.
You lose yourself completely.
But the psychological data highlights this beautiful, almost ironic paradox. The more you learn to love your own company, the more you stop desperately chasing validation, the more incredibly magnetic you become to other people.
It's an ironclad law of human dynamics. Desperation is universally repellent. When you approach someone needing them to fill a hole in your life, they can feel the vacuum and they pull away.
They sense the neediness.
But true independence is incredibly rare, and therefore it is deeply alluring. When you operate from a place of quiet, unshakable self-sufficiency, when you clearly don't need anything from anyone, people are naturally drawn to that grounded energy. They want to be around the person who is complete.
But wait, I have to step in and push back on this because I see a massive potential danger here.
Okay, what is it?
This all sounds incredibly empowering. Be the lone wolf, build your empire in silence, don't need anyone, be a rock. But isn't there a huge risk that we take this too far? Does the Stoic inner citadel and this intense practice of chosen solitude just turn us into cold, unfeeling emotional islands?
That's a valid concern.
Is the ultimate goal of all this self-mastery to become so guarded, so heavily armored, and so relentlessly self-reliant that we never let another human being in ever again? Are we just building a massive brick wall and slapping the word Citadel on it?
It is a very common and very dangerous misinterpretation of Stoicism and solitude. But the answer is an emphatic absolute no. The Stoics were not hermits hiding in caves. They didn't hate people. In fact, they believed deeply in a governing concept called the cosmopolis.
The cosmopolis, meaning the cosmic city or the universal community.
Yes. They believed that despite our individual minds, all human beings are fundamentally interconnected by a shared rationality. Marcus Aurelius constantly wrote in his diaries that humans are like the upper and lower rows of teeth. We are structurally meant to work together. We are limbs of a single body. The purpose of chosen solitude is not to sever those limbs and isolate yourself forever.
Okay.
The purpose is to become whole before you attempt to share yourself.
To become whole, that shifts the paradigm entirely.
Think about the mechanics of connection. If you enter a relationship, whether it's a friendship, a romantic partnership, or even a professional collaboration, from a place of lack, from a desperate, panicked need to not be lonely, that relationship fundamentally becomes a transaction.
You're just using them.
You are using the other person as an emotional crutch to plug a hole in your own broken psyche. You are extracting validation from them just to survive. But if you do the hard, quiet work of solitude, if you build your inner citadel, face your fears, and become emotionally independent, you enter relationships from a place of wholeness.
It changes the dynamic entirely.
It is no longer a transaction. It is a genuine, overflowing gift. You are sharing your completeness with someone else rather than demanding they complete you.
That reframes the entire concept of a lonely period in someone's life. If you're going through a dry spell, a long period of being single, or a season where you have very few friends, it is not a punishment from the universe.
No, it's not.
It is a training camp. It is a mandatory period of preparation for eventual, genuine connection.
Which brings us to the final beautiful stage of our deep dive, the culmination of this entire process, reconnecting from a place of wholeness and what Carl Jung called the archetype of the wounded healer.
Because eventually, the deep thinker, the person who has mastered solitude, has to come back down from the mountain, right? You can't stay in the fortress forever. You have to interact with the world again.
Yes. And synthesizing the end of the psychological and philosophical sources, we find a remarkable transformation. People who spend significant intentional time doing the hard work of chosen solitude do not become cold. They actually develop an extraordinary, unparalleled depth of empathy.
Because they intimately know the sting of isolation, they can spot it in others instantly.
Exactly. They remember the sheer exhaustion of masking fatigue. They remember the terror of the limbic panic. And so when they finally re-engage with the world and encounter others who are struggling, they don't offer cheap surface-level platitudes. They don't just say, cheer up.
Right.
They offer genuine, resonant understanding. This is Jung's archetype of the wounded healer. It is the individual who takes their own brokenness, their own painful experiences of societal rejection or deep isolation, and alchemizes that very pain into a safe space for others.
They become the exact person they always desperately needed when they were lonely. But crucially, and this ties back to the Citadel, because they've done the work, they don't allow themselves to become an emotional dumping ground anymore.
Right. They have learned the mechanics of boundary setting. They are deeply empathetic, but they fiercely protect their energy. As the philosophical texts suggest, they learn to save their pearls, their deep authenticity, their intense emotional depth, their complex thoughts, for those who have proven they can truly appreciate them.
They're selective.
Very. They no longer waste their battery trying to force deep philosophical connections with people who only want surface-level small talk. They accept the hedgehogs for what they are, but they don't get pricked anymore.
I am just picturing what happens when two of these deep thinkers, two people who have both been through the fire of solitude, who have both built their citadels and taken off their masks, when they finally find each other in the wild.
The psychological speculation on this is quite beautiful. When two individuals who have done this intense inner work finally connect, there is a profound, almost instantaneous sense of recognition. It is a massive relief.
It must feel amazing.
They don't have to put the mask of normalcy on. They don't have to meticulously translate their intensity to avoid scaring the other person away. They realize that true high-value connection isn't about constant loud socialization or texting each other 50 times a day or performing an identity.
It's deeper than that.
It is often about quiet, mutual understanding. It is the rare ability to just sit in absolute silence together without anxiety and know you are fully, completely seen.
There is a quote from Viktor Frankl, the brilliant psychiatrist who survived the horrors of the concentration camps, that perfectly encapsulates this entire journey. He said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Loneliness is so often a situation we cannot immediately change. You cannot force someone to love you. You cannot snap your fingers and force a genuine friendship to materialize out of thin air. But the crucible of solitude forces the necessary internal change.
It forces you to forge yourself into a person who is actually ready for those high-value connections when they finally arrive.
Which brings us to the end of this journey. To synthesize everything we've unpacked today, from the neuroscience of the brain to the diaries of a Roman emperor, the core takeaway for you, listening right now, is this. The next time you find yourself alone and you feel that sharp biological ache of loneliness flaring up in your chest, do not rush to numb it. Do not pull out the phone for cheap dopamine. Do not force a bad connection. Do not settle for a toxic relationship just to fill the quiet void in the room. Recognize that ache for what it is, a biological signal, an echo from the savannah. Yes, your ancient limbic system might be panicking, but your rational mind has a choice. You possess the agency to turn that involuntary isolation into a deliberate sanctuary.
Practice the Stoic art of erasing impressions. Melt the wax. Strip away society's shallow judgment of what it means to be alone. Recognize the immense, rare value of this time. Reclaim your schedule, guard your emotional energy, and do the quiet, unglamorous, difficult inner work of self-mastery. Build your inner citadel brick by brick so that when you do finally choose to engage with the world, you do so not out of a desperate need to be saved, but out of a profound, unshakable wholeness.
We spend so much of our lives waiting, desperately looking around the crowded room, waiting for the right person to finally come along and truly understand us, to see our depth, to appreciate our quirks, to make us feel like we finally belong somewhere. But considering the neuroscience, the philosophy, and the alchemy we've explored today, what if the person you've been desperately waiting for is actually just you?